If you like our video, click the button to subscribe to our channel and get easy access to new content. To see our full suite of ad-free video courses, instruction manuals, and quick reference guides, visit us at www.teachucomp.com. After setting the correct white balance for a camera raw image, you should then make additional tonal adjustments to it as needed. To make basic tonal adjustments to camera raw photos in Photoshop, click the Edit button in the toolbar at the right side of the Camera Raw dialog box if needed. Then click the Basic tab in the Edit panel that appears to the left of the toolbar to expand it if needed. Then use the sliders that appear below the white balance section to change the basic adjustment settings. These specific sliders shown in this section depend on the process you chose from the Process dropdown on the Calibration tab. This lesson covers the settings for Process version 5 in the Camera Raw dialog box in Photoshop. To apply automatic adjustments, click the Auto button at the top of the Edit panel. To undo the automatic adjustments, click the Auto button again. To apply a black and white treatment in Camera Raw, click the B&W button at the top of the Edit panel. Doing this applies the Adobe monochrome profile to the image. To remove the black and white treatment, click the B&W button again. To manually adjust the exposure for the selected Camera Raw image, click and drag the exposure slider or enter a value into the adjacent field. This adjusts the brightness or darkness of the image. Move the slider to the left to darken the image, or move the slider to the right to brighten it. The values shown in the adjacent field are equivalent to f-stops. So a setting of plus 1.00 is equivalent to widening the camera aperture by 1 f-stop. Likewise, a value of negative 1.00 is equivalent to reducing the aperture by 1 f-stop. Alternatively, to use the exposure slider to preview where highlights are clipped in an image, hold down the Alt key on your keyboard or the Option key for Mac when dragging the exposure slider to show clipped regions as colored areas in the image. The color indicates areas clipped in only one or two color channels. Non-clipped areas appear black. Move the slider until the non-specular highlights, meaning highlights not from light or reflected light, are completely clipped. Then slightly reverse the adjustment you made. To manually adjust the contrast of a camera raw image, use the Contrast slider. Generally, you should only adjust the contrast of an image after adjusting its exposure, shadows, and brightness. You can slide the slider to the left to decrease the values, resulting in less mid-tone contrast in the image by lightening middle to dark image areas and darkening middle to light image areas. You can slide the slider to the right to increase the values, resulting in more mid-tone contrast in the image by darkening middle to dark image areas and lightening middle to light image areas. You can also enter values into the adjacent field for the slider if preferred. The Highlight slider helps recover details in overexposed highlight areas of an image. Dragging the slider to the left darkens highlights to help recover details in overexposed highlight areas. Dragging the slider to the right brightens highlights while minimizing clipping. You can also enter values into the adjacent field for the slider if preferred. The Shadows slider recovers details in underexposed shadow areas in the image. Dragging the slider to the left darkens shadows while reducing any clipping. Dragging the slider to the right brightens shadows to help recover details in underexposed shadow areas of the camera raw image. You can also enter values into the adjacent field for the slider if preferred. The white slider adjusts the highlight clipping in an image. Drag this slider to the left to reduce highlight clipping. Drag the slider to the right to increase highlight clipping. You can also enter values into the adjacent field for this slider if preferred. The black slider adjusts the shadow clipping in an image. Drag this slider to the left to increase shadow clipping. Drag the slider to the right to decrease shadow clipping. You can also enter values into the adjacent field for the slider if preferred. The texture slider increases or decreases medium frequency details in a camera raw image by sliding this slider to the right or left, respectively. The clarity slider increases or decreases local contrast in a wide range, with the greatest effect on the midtones, by sliding the slider to the right or left, respectively. This can restore detail and sharpness other tonal adjustments may remove. The dehaze slider helps you to remove haze from an image or add haze to an image. Drag this slider to the right to increase the removal of haze in an image, or drag it to the left to add haze to an image. You can also enter values into the adjacent fields for all three of these sliders if preferred. The vibrant slider adjusts color saturation so clipping is minimized as colors approach full saturation. It does this by changing the saturation of all lower saturated colors without changing the higher saturated colors as much. This also helps prevent skin tones from becoming oversaturated. Drag this slider to the right to increase saturation, or slide it to the left to decrease saturation. Similarly, the saturation slider equally adjusts the saturation levels of all color in the image from pure monochrome to double saturation. Drag this slider to the right to increase all color saturation, or drag it to the left to decrease all color saturation. If preferred, you can also enter values into the adjacent fields for both these sliders, which range in values from -100 to +100. To temporarily hide all the white balance and basic adjustments in the preview image in Camera Raw after changing these settings, click and hold down on the eye icon in the upper right corner of the Basic tab within the Edit panel. This temporarily hides the changes in the preview image while you hold down on this icon, so you can see the changes to the Camera Raw preview image. Simply release the mouse button to restore the visibility of the changes. Remember to click the subscribe button to see more of our videos. See our full suite of courses, instruction manuals, and quick reference guides at www.teachucomp.com.